Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humong Us. Sarah Palin has pissed me off. Why? She's promoting a really dangerous notion that Jesus was a weapons fanatic. She's promoting the notion that Jesus was, in her words, a warrior. This is outrageous. Worse, says Palin, she sometimes thinks he was open carry. In other words, Palin believes that if Jesus were around today, he'd be wearing a gun on his fucking hip. Palin said all of this today in a C-SPAN Book TV broadcast of an appearance at the Reagan Ranch promoting her new book, Sweet Freedom, a devotional, which is advertised as 260 meditations based on guiding biblical verse. Maybe it should be advertised as 260 meditations based on misguiding biblical verse. Why is Sarah Palin's gun-toting Jesus dangerous? Why does it piss me off? We follow the lead of our role models. Right now, the Muslim world is being urged to follow the role model of Muhammad. Huge mistake. Muhammad was open carry. He owned 9 swords. Yes, 9. But that's not all. I mean, those were in the days when swords were incredibly expensive. You could buy a house and a farm for the price of a sword. But that's not all. Muhammad commanded 65 military campaigns, and he personally led 27 of them. In the words of the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, he went into battle ready to be killed and ready to kill. And he did kill, personally. He loved killing. He was merciless. He reveled in beheadings. In the case of one Jewish town, Muhammad had every male old enough to have pubic hair carted out to the marketplace of Medina, the town he was living in. And he sat there watching all day long as the heads of these humans were sawed off, and these people, just like you and me, were turned into bags of meat, and he loved it. What's more, Muhammad called for a general policy of terror, a big word in his vocabulary, and bloodshed. We do not need another warrior prophet on this planet. We do not need another God-besotted genocidal maniac. We do not need Sarah Palin's bizarre interpretation of Jesus. But here's the question. Is Sarah Palin right? Was Jesus a weapons fanatic? Was he what Palin tells us he was, a warrior? The word warrior doesn't even show up in the New Testament at all. Not once. Palin cherry-picks a line from Luke in which she claims that Jesus tells his followers to take up arms. And indeed, there is such a verse in Luke. Jesus says, quote, "He that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one." Not 9, 1. But that's one more than anybody should have. Then something strange happens. Jesus' disciples say, "Lord, behold, here are 2 swords." And he says unto them, "It's enough." Really? 2 swords? Enough for an army? 2 swords? Enough for a weapons-carrying warrior? Doesn't sound very warrior-like to me. But the fact is that the quote itself is extraordinarily questionable, highly questionable, very un-Jesus-like. First of all, it's the only time in the New Testament that Jesus says anything at all about taking up swords. Anything. He's usually, in fact, he's almost always very much against swords. Here's a more typical moment. Jesus is being taken prisoner by the high priests and elders. Those priests and elders are, quote, a great multitude with swords and staves, close quote. Says Matthew, and behold, one of the men who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword, and struck a servant of the high priest, and smote off his ear. How does Jesus respond to this? Then said Jesus unto him, put up again thy sword in its place. For all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Unlike the wildly atypical line from Luke, Sarah Palin's favorite line, this story is repeated in the Gospels roughly 4 times. What's more, a variation on the line that he that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword appears over and over again. To understand this, it helps to know a little bit of the history of the Gospels. There are 3, quote, synoptic Gospels, close quote. 3 Gospels that closely parallel each other. These were the first Gospels to be written after Jesus' death, and they're considered to be the most accurate of the Gospels. Luke is one of those synoptic Gospels. Score 1 for Sarah Palin. The problem is that these documents were written 40 years after Jesus' death. Because of that gap in time, the authors had room to play with the material and to make things up. Mark and Matthew, 2 of the synoptic Gospels, emphasize Jesus' abhorrence of violence, his hate of violence. That's why he who lives by the sword shall die by the sword shows up over and over again. Luke's claim that Jesus wanted his followers to buy swords is far more questionable. If Jesus had ever said it, it would have shown up in the other synoptic Gospels. They parallel each other. They repeat each other a lot. The most reliable material is the material that's repeated. Material that isn't repeated is far lower in reliability. The line from Luke may be questionable, but Sarah Palin has used it to turn Jesus into the sort of person she likes the most. And what is that sort of person? A gun-toting fucking psychotic. Why is Palin's fixation on this quote important? A culture takes on the personality of the person it regards as its founder. The jihadists have a founder, Muhammad, and his track record of mass killings leads them to conclude, in the words of a member of Hezbollah, that, quote, Islam is a tree that feeds on blood and grows on severed limbs, close quote. To repeat, your view of your founder counts. And Jesus is the culture founder who has given us the abolition of slavery and peace movements. In fact, Jesus' spirit has given us Westerners the only mass abolition of slavery and the only long-term peace movements in the history of humanity. That is the Jesus we need to keep in mind. We are already dealing with one psychotic, weapon-loving prophet on this planet, thanks to the Muhammad of the jihadists, the Muhammad of the Muslim extremists. We do not need to match Muhammad with a killer Christ. We do not need the Jesus of Sarah Palin. This is Howard the Humongous, speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make, or, want to know why, ask how. And now, oh God, for that infinitely spliffy, spleezy, sneezy, sloppy, slorpy little off button. I think I've got it.